Okay, thank you so much for continuing to work with us this afternoon. We'll just take a little bit of time to go over a few other things. Almost everything that Lisa and I had planned for the workshop today was highlighted by Gina, but we'll talk a little bit more. She did such an amazing job. So the book that Gina was referring to, the Story Workshop, New Possibilities for Young Writers, is one of Susan McKay's books, and she highlighted it in her presentation. Now, what's interesting is that Susan shares in her book that it was her and her colleagues sitting from Opal coming into discussion, and their main question that they came up with was, what is the connection between literacy and arts? From there, so many other questions emerged to really build the beginning of Story Workshop at Opal. So what might be the role of play? What happens when we infuse writing workshop with ample use of arts and time to play? How do the voice and choice that results when we invite children to create and tell their stories lead to a classroom practice of democracy? So we're getting into some really interesting, very, very deep questions. And how does this practice both rely on and reinforce equity and access for all? So consider those questions. I'm going to continue on, but if you consider those questions and just think, is there one that you could really dive into with your colleagues or discuss and play around with as you enter into a space of Story Workshop? And learn kind of alongside the author of the book, that her process of how they decided to work together to explore Story Workshop. Okay, so what is Story Workshop? Gina said it wonderfully well, so I can't really say anything else other than that structure that supports the language and literacy development. So we're giving it a bit of a structure for our students to experiment and play around with their experiences, to think about, what stories belong to them, what do they want the world to hear, what do they want to tell, and then really getting into the active stories, so how they influence us, our community. So what this is really setting up is a lot of our students exploring identity through the story workshop model. It's a lot of our students being empowered by their voice and choice that was brought up to, tell their story, to explore stories, to honor the fact that our students have their own individual, unique voices that we want to hear and we want the world to hear along with us. So when we consider why Story Workshop, really, it's helping our students engage with our students in a way around curiosity. So we talked a little bit about that, but we want them to be curious about the environment around them. We want our students to be open to risk-taking and exploring the world around them. But also we're really working on that communication piece. So our students are working really a lot on describing, on unpacking, on communicating, all of the important things that make them individual and unique. So the fact that they are given the space to expand their language development, to listen to others and learn from others and make connection to other people's stories and create that community, it's really giving them a space to have big emotions, as Gina mentioned as well, and a space to talk about them, communicate them, work through how to communicate with others and share with others what's going on in our world. So inviting other people into our space. So I had the pleasure of listening to a researcher a couple of months ago at a conference, and Bonowitz was her name, and it's referenced there at the bottom. And she had a presentation on motivating a love of learning presentation. And what she focused on was curiosity. So her whole research was on curiosity and really looking at that aspect of curiosity that's around the quest for understanding, not fact-finding kind of curiosity. So she wanted to understand what the connection was between curiosity and play and learning. So what one of her great findings was the goal of curiosity is to prepare the mind for learning. So it prepares us to be ready to decide which information we want or need to attend to. Just really, really exciting when we think of the connection between story workshop, provocations, and our questioning. How we engage our students in story workshop is really using that sense of curiosity to get them ready for the learning that's coming. We ask engaging questions, and what we found from those engaging questions is that our students come into the learning environment already primed to experiment, explore, not necessarily find the right answer, but to consider different possibilities. Actually, the study that she had was really interesting because she brought in 6-year-olds into a science center, and half of the group were told that they could go explore, find out what they were interested in, and the other half were given questions and told to ask questions as they went to different learning centers. And the students that, first of all, the engagement it doubled with the group that were asked questions and asked to consider questions on their journey. As well, it was really interesting because the group that came in to the demographic that came in with a really strong understanding of language and really strong command of language didn't necessarily show a lot of growth, but the group that showed incredible growth through this opportunity were the students that came in with more limited language opportunities. So the fact that they were invited into a place where they were questioning and asking questions created more of a growth in language development and engagement.
That's so cool.
Yeah, no, it was a fascinating study. Okay, so we've already seen a lot from Gina's presentation of different materials that can be used, but this is a short little video that might inspire you even further.
Yeah, we really liked how it just laid out. There's different tables and there's a different provocation or question, inquiry, invitation at each table, along with different materials. And it felt reassuring to me and comforting when I watched this the first time I saw it, and just looking at how many of the materials I would have already had on hand in my classroom. And so maybe sometimes it's just a way of reorganizing or regrouping the materials that we do have in a different kind of way with that story workshop plan.
Yeah, thank you. I echo what Lisa said, that it's sometimes reassuring when we see what other people are doing and the power that the simple materials that we already have in our classroom sometimes can have in a story workshop environment. So what I ask you here is, we saw a lot of questioning and different provocations for students to engage with the materials. So taking a look at what we have here in the pictures, what questions can you ask? And please pop them into the chat box and we'll put a 90-second timer on here. Fantastic. So we have lots of different ideas about, do colors have different reactions? What happens when we mix colors? What happens when we mix colors on ice? What stories live on frozen things? Excellent. Or yeah, really focusing on that color. What stories can colors tell? Is that ice and salt? Oh, you know what? It is ice and salt. Thank you. What stories live as time passes? Oh, interesting. Thank you. So another educator from Opal wanted to explore the idea of her students communicating emotions in a way that would help them be empathetic and compassion to their peers. So she wanted to take a look at how to bring out that communication of emotions without using the standard language of I am feeling sad or I am feeling mad. She was also really interested in colors and how our students could communicate through the use of colors. And she specifically said, can you use colors and lines to capture the feeling of angry? Because she didn't want necessarily images that were connected to senses of of emotions, like a happy face or something like that. She specifically wanted it to be more about colors and lines. So the students engaged with that, and you can see the first one, I used brown and black, and I made scribbles because angry things feel scribbles. You might explode. When I'm angry, it is and the second one, when I'm angry, it is a loud, angry, like thunder and lightning. And the third one was interesting to the teacher who was engaging with these students because I think we think of pink and red as kind of happy colors. So she asked her about this one, and the child said, the pinkness is I'm mad because my cheeks get pink. The redness comes out of my ears like fire coming out of your ears. So just the range of emotions there and the way that students were able to really capture that through their work with materials is amazing. And Gina already talked a lot about the writing workshop connection, which was a lot about setting up dual structures so that our students get to know the workshop model through story workshop and writing workshop as a way to either, build and create in story workshop and then continue that process in writing workshop is a lot, Gina showed lots of examples of that, which was wonderful. But getting our students to know that both of the workshop feels like them creating something, feels like their voice empowering them. And I just really love the idea when we look at the second bullet there on invitation, that we're empowering the action for students to have created stories through story workshop, to write them down so their story can be accessed for a long period of time. Now, when we think of empowering, there's nothing more empowering than having your story, your writing, your personal thoughts being able to be accessed for a long period of time. Like that's really the historical reason for written word. So that's so inspiring thinking of that. And when we're talking about documentation, again, just highlighting what Gina already said, but really being purposeful about what it is that our intention is, what is the learning intention for the students, and how will we find out more about that. Being purposeful about preparing, about the tools that we'll need. I love this question, how will you position yourself to observe with an open mind? And what will you notice? What patterns will you see? And then, of course, all leading to that final question of what is next? How does this inform my next instructions? Okay, I'm going to let Lisa talk to this wonderful example that she found on Twitter.
Yeah, it was quite serendipitous. I found this Claire on Twitter this morning. Actually, someone else had retweeted some of her work, and I thought, what a perfect timely fit for our workshop this afternoon. So I squeezed them in. So if you are on Twitter, you can definitely check her out. Her handle is there in the bottom left, Claire V. Potts, and she is a Reggio-inspired international early childhood educator teaching in Mozambique. And she has a way with words and her photos are beautiful, but we loved this question. Can we create inviting and intentionally designed environments for learners to ask questions, test theories, and share discoveries while we guide, question, and document their learning? So it really highlights that shift from teacher as the one with all the knowledge, the old school way that maybe we experienced standing at the front of the room telling students, here's how it is, here's the information, here's what you need to know. And it puts us in that guide on the side role. Story workshop allows the students to be front and center and to lead and drive things with their questions and their theories and their conversations and connections. And we're there to guide and question and then documenting their learning, which ties into that assessment piece that Jen just spoke to. So here's a couple of activities she did with her students. So this blending of science and art. So they discovered if they put paint drops into oil, it formed spheres and it sank. But if they put oil drops on water, it floated and expanded. So you just think of all the rich learning that's going on there. And this one here too, they did a close study at the painting Starry Night by Van Gogh. And then they did some sharing on all the things that they saw, thought, and wondered, realized everyone saw something different. And then using mixed media, they recreated their own version by painting on tinfoil. So you see these lovely little, tiny little kids doing some amazing artwork, and here's the finished product.
It's
Isn't
amazing.
that just so striking? Inspiring, for sure.
And we just love this quote from the early learning framework. Children learn by doing when they are engaged in projects and inquiries that extend their interests. And really changing that mindset from getting our students ready for school is getting our schools ready for students and thinking about how we can invite them into that space.